Good afternoon, everyone. Ritvik has actually put the judgment in perspective, looking at it from an environmentalist eyes. I would look at this issue from a slightly different perspective. For me, the way probably the Indians look at their nature is quite distinct from what the West has trained us to look at it from. It is not a resource for us. It is a part of our existence. It is a part of our godliness. It is a part of our continuity with our past and also with our future. If you go back to the source or how the concept of rivers or probably how they have originated from the available literature, I'm talking about the Indian context, because Uttarakhand judgment deals with Ganga and Yamuna. To put it in perspective, let's look at the manner in which Ganga has come into existence. Ganga was brought to earth for a purpose, to serve a purpose of mankind, specifically for a family, to actually take the waters so that the waters reach Rasatala, where the forefathers of the Suryavansh were made to ashes by a great sage for having disturbed his penance. When Ganga was brought in after several thousand years of penance by Bhagirath, it was locked in the locks of Lord Shiva. Again, he had to do a lot of penance to get it released. After great struggle, it comes down and it splits into several streams. And one such stream was actually taken through a tunnel to actually into the bowels of earth, and then the ashes were washed and cleansed, and thereby the souls were redeemed. So that is the origin of Ganga as I see it from an Indian perspective. So therefore, making of tunnels for me is nothing new. It was always done. In fact, it was done, and it was the primary purpose for which Ganga was brought in. So therefore, there is no problem as far as utilization of water which is flowing through the rivers. Now the second issue is, from the judgment's perspective, what is a legal entity? And who's qualified to declare a legal entity as one? Now, if you look at it from a perspective purely from a legal sense, legal entity is someone who's been imaginarily created to be a person with trappings of rights and duties and liabilities and obligations to deal with and enter into jural relations, as we would look at it from a jurisprudential perspective. Now, this judgment perplexed me. The first question I asked is, when there is a flood, who's going to be liable? Will the chief secretary, the parents patria? Because he is the man who's been made the parents patria now. So therefore, this actually puzzled me as a lawyer. I mean, the first question is, we see the floods, we've seen Uttarakhand, what happened. Now, who's going to be answering for the liabilities of this river if it is a legal entity? So unless that question is addressed, this discussion will be incomplete and probably would be actually another concept which is imported from West with no basis and with no logical sustenance in law. Because the first person would be me to sue some river saying that, boss, you flooded my house, you've actually drowned my children, or you've actually taken away my cattle, or you've encroached, you've actually trespassed into my house when you're not supposed to trespass. Merely because it rains, you can't trespass into my house. There's a trespass. So are we addressing these issues as if it is a legal entity, so who's going to answer for these liabilities which will be incurred? So therefore, I think the approach is completely flawed, and the way we look at living entities is completely different from the way the Western, the Roman or the English common law would look at entities. Their approach is quite narrow, as is recognized judicially from 1888 onwards, various judgments. Looking at the Indian way of life or the Hindu concepts of idol having life with the prana pratishtha, etc. being done in the traditional manner in the case of temples, or in fact the concept of a jural existence in a non-living being or a non-human being was always recognized in Indian mythology. Yajnavalkya spoke about mutts which were already there. They had an existence independent of the Mathadipati. Mathadipati is the human agency through which the affairs of the mutts are actually conducted. And we have living examples of several mutts which are continuing for hundreds and thousands of years. with continued identity and existence. So therefore, to put it in an English law concept of a juristic entity may be incorrect. We need to look at it from an Indian perspective and then look at the problem and also address the problem from that perspective alone, which would probably lead us to some kind of a solution. Now, by making it a living entity, what are we doing? Are we actually giving anything to it? No. Are we taking away anything? We are in any case taking it away. So this public trust doctrine, which is a Roman concept, which has been introduced into our environmental jurisprudence, actually has ensured that the entire manner of functioning under the Constitution is actually hijacked. I'll tell you why. We are a democracy which is governed by rule of law with a Constitution and also separation of powers in Article 50, which is an aspirational provision. Directive principles are aspirational. Now, we've already forgotten that aspect, and then it's read into the Constitution as a basic feature. I have no difficulty with that, because you cannot tamper with the independence of judiciary. But the problem is, whose job is it? Now, legally, the law is very clear that the status of a legal entity can only be done through a legislative act. It cannot be done through a judicial act. The judgments of Supreme Court are very clear on this aspect. So whether a court of law, maybe a constitutional court, can actually create a legal entity, it's effectively giving birth. Are courts the places of birth for new entities? Is a question that I ask. With respect, I don't see the constitutional scheme permitting creation of entities through a mechanism of courts. The place of birth under the Constitution is the legislature and legislature alone. Any other place, if a birth takes place or anything which is created, will have its own problems, namely accountability and then planning for the entity's other requirements. If you create a statute through a legislative mechanism, then provisions are there which provide for the rights, obligations, duties, and the objects which it seeks to achieve. But in the event it is created through a judicial order, this judgment of the Uttarakhand High Court has been stayed now. But assuming it is actually ratified by the Supreme Court, now what will be the consequences? Now who will be appointing these people? Who will be actually replacing these people over a period of time? Is this what, as a citizen, I would like to happen? I mean, would I have a judiciary which is actually doing a judicial review of whatever is being legislated and whatever is being acted upon by the executive, or interpreting the existing provisions of the Constitution, or in the guise of interpretation is creating new entities? Now, are we in any way short of legal entities in this country that you need to create one more? So therefore, I think there is a basic fundamental flaw in this approach. For me, rivers are always been a legal entity or a living entity, as I would prefer to call it, rather than a juristic person as understood in a Western concept of law. A living entity is someone with whom you relate. You can touch, feel, perceive, and then also pass on from your generation to the next generation. I come from a state, my ancestors surely from the basin of Krishna River. So that river is actually part of our family culture and heritage. So if somebody asks me today, I mean, I may have to say I'm from Telangana because we've settled here. But the fact remains that culturally we are rooted on the basins of Krishna River. So the rituals or whatever life that is there, our food habits, is actually broadly based on the basis of our life around that basin and the agriculture which is associated with it, the rituals which are associated with, the culture which is associated. Similarly is the Ganga Jamuna Tehzeeb that is spoken about in this part of the country. So therefore it is more a cultural thing, which is more a natural phenomenon which we are born into and we grow into and then we pass it on to the next generation. Now the question of the decay and misuse and defilement of this living entity called a river. Now the river as a living entity has been defiled for various reasons. I mean, at some point of time we were looking at industrialization because the economy needed industrialization and probably it still needs, because lack of jobs would mean what? For the growing population, mere agriculture may not be adequate. So we need to be put things in a perspective and pragmatic about what we are actually expecting. you cannot have a clean river and then people starving to death because of unemployment. Is that what we are aspiring? Probably no. Then what are we looking at? So therefore, we need to conserve our resources more compassionately, not legally. So therefore, there is a need probably to create awareness about the complete interrelation between a human life and the nature and around it, which is definitely the part of our upbringing in India, definitely. We can't speak about others for that, but for Indians, nature is a very integral part of our life, irrespective of our faith. Because we have association with rivers in our literature, poetry. So therefore, a poet's imagination about a river would actually give it various attributes, various perspectives, various mood fluctuations of the river are actually recorded in their poetry. And then that imagination, if you bring it in the realm of law, becomes a juristic person. Because Salmond says so. He says juristic person is an imagination of law, which is created with the perspective of giving it a status to meet the social requirements of the times that we live in. Now, do the times that we live in require some intervention judicially or otherwise for a declaration of a living entity status to a river, and what will be the consequences? So, living entity for me would be a more pragmatic thing in the constitutional spirit, that you actually are more compassionate about the surroundings and then probably follow the principles of Mahatma Gandhi to say that it should be used for our needs and not for our greeds. Now, what has happened is, we have always treated our resources as a matter of right and not as a matter of our duties towards the society or what it is supposed to be having a role beyond a human supplement or supply the requirements of the human beings, because there are various other species which are very necessary for our existence as a human race. So therefore, we need to look at it from a perspective and then believe that you are part of the entire universe and not the master of the universe, and therefore step into the shoes of a parents patria or any otherwise. If you respect the nature as part of a universe where everyone coexists with different forms, shapes, and then purposes in life. Everyone has a purpose in life. I mean, I'm sure as a young person you would like to become something, or later you change your course or circumstances change your course, but there is definitely a purpose in life that one seeks to achieve. There is a purpose with which the rivers were created. There was a purpose with which the forests were created. There is a purpose with which the minerals were actually kept in the forests or mountains. And then are we actually using them or abusing them or exploiting them to the extent of making them extinct? And the consequences will flow and which are actually to be seen here in Delhi. I mean, we actually breathe carbon dioxide. I mean, we don't breathe oxygen anymore in Delhi, as we see. I mean, I've been in Delhi for 23 years. The kind of carbon dioxide that we breathe, I mean, I don't know how long we'll sustain. Now, do we declare air as a living entity for that? At least in Delhi, the Delhi legislature can actually take up a bill and say, air in Delhi is a living entity, and therefore Haryana, Punjab, and then other neighboring states are injuncted from actually passing any smoke into Delhi. Now, just see the consequences. Would any court of law would actually sustain such a legislation? Or would it be practical to have such a kind of a declaration of law with no consequences? In fact, I recall my professor, S.N. Singh, who taught us environmental law. He was quite critical about all these judgments which were actually adding to our syllabus in 94, 97 in the environmental jurisprudence. In fact, the entire case material in 96, 97 was changed with the new judgments which had come about during that sphere on environmental law. And he was highly critical, and I actually see it now validly critical for the reason because the entire environmental protection has been taken over from the legislature and the executive, and now they are subservient to the judicial diktats. Now, what is the consequence of this judicial diktat? They do not have the wherewithal or the mechanism to actually enforce their orders. This is precisely what was taught by Professor S.N. Singh in our classroom in Delhi University campus. He said they do not have the wherewithal and they do not have the capacity to enforce these orders, declaring new rights and then actually trying to protect. So what they succeeded is creating an adversarial litigation where the government and the courts are adversarial and the activists align with the courts, and then there are committees which get constituted and they actually take over the administration of a country, including the policy making. The policies are vetted prior, not by the standing committees of the legislature, but others. So So what is the consequences? The actually assignment of a particular role under the Constitution is actually now completely breached. Now, if there is a policy which is actually with a judicial impromptu which comes through, where do I go and question it? Where is my judicial review as a citizen? If it is a legislative act, I have a right, I go and approach the court and the court will strike it down if it is unconstitutional. Even if it has been passed with a complete unanimity across the country. But that right of mine is now actually compromised. That is a serious consequence of this activism as I see. Now coming back to living entity status being given through a court of law, which is I think impermissible because the creation of a legal entity through a judicial order I think is impermissible as per the law declared by the Supreme Court and otherwise also. The second part of the argument would probably it has recognized a pre-existing status of a legal entity. That is actually conceivable because a legal entity which could pre-exist but unless it is judicially recognized may not exist in law. So let's take the case of a Guru Granth Sahib which Supreme Court has actually looked into and said it is a living entity. It is a juristic person when placed in a holy Gurudwara where people revere and that has been created for the purpose. Every Guru Granth Sahib, the court has actually stated, is not a living entity, but a Guru Granth Sahib kept in a holy Gurudwara for the purpose of a congregation is where a juristic person comes into being or is existing already because of the dictate of the 10th Guru who was the last Guru. So therefore, it is a recognition of a pre-existing status which is judicially permissible. Now, are we looking at the Uttarakhand judgment? I was surprised, except quoting from all over the world, there is no legal basis or a jurisprudential reasoning in this Uttarakhand judgment to protect the river or to give it a legal entity status. Is this what, I mean, an emotional outburst with respect? Can it lead to a status of a legal entity? What are we creating by way of living entities or illegal entities with no consequences and without any judicial basis for the entire exercise? I can understand if a reasoning is supplied stating that it was always treated as a human or as a living entity and therefore we recognize that status. That is still understandable. But that is absent in this judgment, except that it is revered. We revere many things. We revere air, we revere fire, we revere forests, we revere trees, we revere hillocks. So therefore, we need to be clear as to what, as lawyers or law students, you should be pondering over it. Is this what we are looking at? A mere conferment of a bonanza called a living entity status with some people being appointed as parens patriae. Is this what it is supposed to be to actually protect the rivers? Or probably there's something called a coexistence, which always was there, which is part of our way of life, which we have definitely deviated for the reasons of Western influence, I would say, because commodification of nature is a Western concept, where you actually commodify and then actually make it a resource and then you auction it and then you get the maximum value. So therefore you've commodified nature. So how can you complain, having commodified nature, that it is actually being abused or misused? So first we need to relook at it, and we need to look at it very seriously, that from a jurisprudential perspective or a legal perspective, to put it simply from a judgment point of view. In fact, I was wondering, I mean, a legal entity would be able to sue for itself and then will be liable to be sued when it enters into a jural relationship or if it is in conflict with any law. So therefore, I think we need to be more serious in declaring entities as living entities and not do it only for the sake of the phonetics or the sound effects that it would create. There needs to be more serious thinking as to what will be the legal consequences of such a declaration. With respect, I don't see that reasoning or the effect of that declaration. I mean, immediately when there's a flood now, thankfully the Supreme Court has stayed it. There would have been 100 suits or writ petitions against the management board, whoever are the parens patriae with the extended. Will they become personally liable for it? Like in case of a corporate fraud, the directors get personally responsible because they are the persons in charge. So these are the questions I think which needs to be deliberated in more seriousness, and then from a fresh approach to the entire issue, we cannot actually be oblivious to the needs of the current generation and at the same time not be sensitive to the needs of the environment. If you treat environment at least as an equal, if not more than you, probably will be more sensitive to its needs, and then not treat it only as a resource or a commodity which you buy in a bottle for 10 rupees or 20 rupees. Unless we grow out of that mindset, which we have actually grown into, because I remember buying a bottle of water in 88 when I came to Delhi as a student. So commodification has had begun by then, probably because of failure of various other agencies, goes without saying. But in a constitutional democracy, there are ways and means, and the persons who are responsible for the role they have been assigned under the Constitution, when they fail, there are mechanisms. But if there is a short-circuiting of these duties, and then there is somebody else who steps in fact, I'm reminded of the Bhagavad Gita, where Lord Krishna himself says that do your duty, even though imperfectly, you're doing a great job. But doing somebody else's duty is not acceptable. With that, I leave it to the floor to ponder over this issue.